It's often said that eyes are the window to the soul. And I often feel that, ironically, windows are the windows to the soul of a building, or at least to its interior. Windows are this wonderful opportunity to have a slight transition from exterior to interior, to show a sense of the beyond, to leave a tantalizing thought or glimpse for imagination, just to connect deeper in with our scene. In many ways, being able to see through a window increases the depth of plane. It takes us to a place further away than other points in the drawing, in the scene. So I thought this very simple building that I came across in a New South Wales country town, an old building, old by Australian standards, was a good one to do, to look at how we treat windows, particularly how we treat what's behind the glass. And much of the time what I see is basically all the windows blacked out. Now, sometimes that's the effect that we have in life because of whatever geographic and light considerations there are at that point. However, often I think it's just basically a shortcut because it's easier and quicker and perhaps a little safer than trying to create what's really there. Now, you're watching me draw this at half as fast again. So you can take this video back to real time by using the cog icon to adjust the speed. And I will do the outline for the building, but I will use the windows to space exactly where those walls are. I find that's far more accurate than doing the wall outlines first and then hoping that I can fit the windows in the right proportions and spacings. So just looking at these angles, because there's little detail on the facade, virtually none, just these 6 gaps in the wall, 5 of which have windows and 1 has the doorway. So I'm just aligning where things are. And then once I've got the outline done, I can now start to bring these windows to life in some way. And the first thing that I need to do for that is to create the sense of depth of 3 dimensions. So if we look at our reference, if we look at the closest window, the closest upper window, we can see that, in fact, we've got depth going into the wall, and then we've got some timber surrounds, and at least on the downstairs window, there's 2 framings of timber on the downstairs, and then we have 2 windows with the sash windows, and each of those is divided into 6 smaller panes. And then in different windows, we've got different things happening. On the upstairs closest one, right-hand one, there's a blind that's fully pulled down and we have shadows from the window and the edge of the wall being cast onto that blind. In the centre one, we have something similar, but the effect is a little bit different, and it looks as though the blind may not be smooth against the wall or against the window. And in the far upper one, we have a blind that's partly pulled down. Downstairs on the left, we have a blind that's mostly pulled down, just a little ripple of darkness at the bottom. And on the right-hand side, we have a blind that's mostly pulled up. And in the right-hand lower one, the darkness that we see behind the glass under the blind is not even the whole way across. It's darker on the right-hand side of that window than the left-hand side. Now you can see my way of doing windows and doing things such as crossbars that are meant to line up. I go right across all the windows to help me just line them up exactly. Not for that center window because it's a smaller window and it doesn't align with the two outer windows. And now I'm using a 0.1 millimeter pen. It's a fine pen, and even so I'm trying to draw very finely with it. I didn't want to use a 0.05 though. I thought that would have been too fine, and I wanted to use the same pen for the whole drawing. So at this scale, it's taking a bit of effort to hold the pen lightly, and light gentle lines that are still accurate. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm basically looking at my reference, observing what's there, and seeking to add those details to my drawing in an effective way. And of course there are shadows as well on the wall inset. Just about the only shadows except in the doorway. And so now I do the same thing on this window. Doing my best not to get mixed up with filling in value behind those struts, those white struts. You can see, or you might have noticed, that I mostly just have done one line for those ones inside each sash window. And it's important that I therefore establish the width by drawing the shadow on the other side. I didn't want the struts to be too dark, too black, attracting too much attention, because they don't on the building. It's a very subtle effect, and I was wanting to capture that very light effect, overall light effect, as much as I could. Certainly then behind the windows that have the white blinds. So we're halfway done. And now, similar technique, but obviously different details with the ground floor, with the two windows we have. But it's the same thing. I've got the window inset to the wall to show, and then I've got some timber beading that frames the areas where the panes of glass are. And then we have some more struts, some more supports for the 6 planes we have. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm looking to see what we have, and I'm seeking to replicate both the shape of the shadows and also the value of the shadows, where they're light, where they're dark. I'm not wanting to make them all the same. When the shadows vary, that tells us that what's behind, even though we can't really see any of it, it tells us that what's behind varies. Whether it's a wall or a partition, whether it's furniture, there's something there that's meaning the light is not looking the same through every one of those panes of glass. And that adds interest. Now, there was a light or something, I think maybe it's on a low bookshelf under the window, in this window, and I did just do a little indistinct gap basically in the value hatching to indicate that. It doesn't have to be apparent what everything is. We don't have to know what it is to draw the effect that it creates. Often, in fact, we look in a scene like this, and even though it's a photo, we don't actually know what it is. And it doesn't worry us. It doesn't stop us from interpreting the scene. And now I have just these 2 on the upper windows only, little decorative mouldings under the windows. And I'll just firm up what I've done here. Notice that the horizontal lines across the left-hand side of the building there form wedges, and we can see the wedge in that upper decorative section. As the horizontal lines go above eye level, they become greater and greater in angle. Eye level is somewhere between the top of the doorway and the bottom of the doorway, because we can see how the lines change direction somewhere between those two. So I've now got the doorway to do. So I spend a bit of time doing this, and in the end I'm not hugely happy with the effect I'm getting, because I don't want to have the lines go outside the edges of the building, and yet just the slight time it takes me to hover the pen and to start slowly to make sure my pen's in the right place, more ink bleeds into the paper than for the rest of the stroke, which means I'm getting a heavy outline down the edge of the doorway. So I don't want that, so I go back to this old method, which I haven't used for a while, but it's very handy because usually if we're drawing, we do have a scrap of paper that we can tear an edge off and use just to give ourselves some faster, more confident, not just faster, but actually lines that create the marks that we want better than if we just did it even carefully. And I just fill in a few gaps where the random nature of doing this wasn't quite as helpful. And so pretty much done now. I'm just doing a bit more to finish the building. I'm doing these this single stone coursework at the bottom that the building sits on. And then I just have the grass, and I think the rosebush, the climbing rosebush that sits in front. So what we see, half of it is the rosebush and half of it is shadow against the wall, but we really can't work out what's what, I don't think. But what we want to draw is lines on our paper, marks on our paper, without trying to agonizingly do the exact thing we have in our reference. But we want to give the effect that it's an object and it's shadow. And so we want to have lines that look like they're not quite parallel, but similar lines close to each other. One of which will be the rose and one of which will be the shadow. So, getting close to that. Just finishing this bush on the left-hand side, just to break up the severity of the lines otherwise. And then we have a shadow. Notice I'm doing the shadow with lines in a different direction to the lines for the bush to help create some distinction between the two. And now we have the rose. Again, I start at the top and I work down, because the key thing is to finish the bush in the right place with a nice light touch. And if I go upwards from the ground, I may finish the lines too soon or not soon enough. I may finish the lines with too much pressure and get very dark lines that I don't want. So the way around that is to start at the top, where I could easily control a nice light series of marks that start in exactly the place I want to, and then I bring them down to ground level. And here we have it. Windows that I hope in some way are windows to the soul of the room, or at least to the interior of the room. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. Please hit the like button if you did. And next time you have windows where we have more than just black deadness behind them, why not, if you don't already, give consideration to really studying what we can see and interpreting that in our lines on the paper, and create windows that really do breathe life, at least visibility, into our building. But look, whatever you draw, windows or not, however you draw them, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.